Imagine standing at the entrance of the most sacred building in your nation, the symbol of divine protection, national identity, and the centuries of tradition, and telling everyone inside that it's about to be destroyed and that it's their fault. That's exactly what Jeremiah did, and the people nearly killed him for it. But Jeremiah had a historical ace up his sleeve, a place called Shiloh, and its story proved that sacred buildings had been destroyed before. To understand why this was so dangerous, we need to know who Jeremiah was and what he was up against. Jeremiah was born into a priestly family in the village of Anathoth, just north of Jerusalem. He began prophesying as a young man around 627 BCE during the reign of King Josiah. He witnessed Josiah's great religious reform, a national revival centered on rediscovering the law of God. For a brief moment, the nation seemed to be turning around. Then Josiah died in battle at Megiddo in 609 BCE, and everything collapsed. Under Josiah's successor, Jehoiakim, the nation spiraled into moral and political decay. Jeremiah stands alongside Isaiah and Ezekiel as one of the three major prophets of Israel. Here's what Jeremiah was up against, a deeply held belief called the inviolability of Zion. The conviction that because God dwelled in the Jerusalem temple, the city could never fall. This was not fringe theology. It was mainstream conviction, and the people had evidence for it. In 701 BCE, the Assyrian king Sennacherib besieged Jerusalem with a massive army. The city should have fallen. It didn't. The Assyrians withdrew, and the people credited God's protection of his temple. That miraculous deliverance became the foundation of a national theology. God lives here, so we are safe, no matter what. This made Jeremiah's counter-message almost impossible to accept. Into this certainty, God sends Jeremiah to stand at the temple gate with a devastating sermon recorded in Jeremiah chapter 7. The sermon has a clear structure. First, Jeremiah demands moral reform using the ethical vocabulary of the book of Deuteronomy. Execute justice, protect the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. Do not shed innocent blood. Do not follow other gods. Then he echoes the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, listing the people's violations: stealing, murder, adultery, swearing falsely. The people commit these acts and then run to the temple declaring, "We are safe." Jeremiah's accusation cut to the core. The people had turned God's house into moral cover for their crimes. The temple wasn't protecting them, it was enabling them. Jeremiah was not anti-temple, he was pro-covenant. His demands came from the oldest traditions Israel possessed, but Jeremiah didn't stop at words. He had historical evidence, and he was willing to put his body on the line. Jeremiah's historical proof was Shiloh. Centuries before Solomon built the temple, the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in Israel, rested at a sanctuary in Shiloh under the priest Eli and his sons. Around 1050 BCE, the Philistines attacked. Israel brought the Ark into battle, trusting it would guarantee victory. It didn't. The Philistines destroyed the sanctuary, killed Eli's sons, and captured the Ark itself. The holiest object in Israel could not save the place that housed it. If God allowed Shiloh to fall despite the Ark's presence, Jeremiah asked, why would the temple be any different? This was a devastating argument because it used Israel's own history against its current assumptions. The people believed sacred objects guaranteed safety. Shiloh proved they didn't. The destruction of the temple was not unprecedented. It had happened before. The people simply chose to forget. Jeremiah didn't just preach, he performed. He paraded through Jerusalem wearing a wooden yoke across his shoulders, the kind used on oxen, physically embodying the coming servitude to Babylon. The message was visceral. Submission is coming. Then a prophet named Hananiah confronted him publicly. Hananiah grabbed the wooden yoke off Jeremiah's neck and snapped it, declaring that God would break Babylon's power within 2 years. The crowd cheered, but Jeremiah returned with a new yoke, this one made of iron. His message to Hananiah, you broke wood, so God will replace it with iron. The judgment cannot be broken. Even more shocking, in Jeremiah chapter 27, verse 6, he called Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the destroyer, God's servant. To his contemporaries, this sounded like treason. It was not. It was theology. Jeremiah claimed that Babylon was God's instrument of judgment. Resisting Babylon was not patriotic courage. It was defiance of divine will. The enemy was not acting on his own. He was acting on God's orders. Notice what Jeremiah was doing throughout. He was not inventing new theology. The temple sermon wove together two foundational traditions: Deuteronomic ethics, justice for the stranger, orphan, and widow, and the Decalogue. Jeremiah was a conservative voice demanding fidelity to the original covenant. That made his message harder to dismiss. So what happened? And why does this message still echo thousands of years later? In 586 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar's army breached the walls of Jerusalem, burned Solomon's temple to the ground, and carried the population into exile. Jeremiah's warning was vindicated completely. The destruction forced a total rethinking of how Israel related to God without a temple, without a homeland, without the physical markers of divine presence, and the echo carried further. 6 centuries later, Jesus of Nazareth entered the Jerusalem temple, overturned the money changers' tables, and quoted Jeremiah directly, "You have made it a den of thieves." Mark chapter 11, verse 17. Jeremiah's principles survived the building that inspired it. Jeremiah paid a heavy price for this message. To his contemporaries, he looked like a traitor, undermining national morale, calling the enemy God's servant, wearing yokes of submission through the streets of Jerusalem. He was arrested, beaten, thrown into a cistern, and left to die. But Jeremiah's so-called treason was rooted in a deeper loyalty to the covenant itself. He understood something his nation refused to accept, that institutions, no matter how sacred, cannot protect a society that has abandoned justice. The temple was never the guarantee. The covenant was. Jeremiah's message endures because that tension between institutional comfort and moral obligation never goes away.